We have observed in the last 20 years a very definite change in the relationships between the peoples of the earth. Probably the most dramatic change that we are able to notice is the relationship between Western culture and the total structure of humanity. Up to 20 years ago, the West was the undisputed leader of the world in nearly all phases of life. Western ways, Western thoughts, Western methods were copied, were regarded as the most advanced, and were almost universally admired. Now this has changed, and little by little, world conditions have eroded away the foundation of Western culture. While we do not like to emphasize this point or really think about it, we are faced with it, and we are in the embarrassing situation of gradually losing our supremacy in the various areas of man's thinking and living. Perhaps there is no area in which our supremacy was as deeply rooted or as strongly upheld as the area of religion. For nearly 2,000 years, we have assumed that our religion would ultimately convert the whole earth. We built upon this foundation. We psychologically sustained ourselves with the conviction that it was predestined and foreordained that our way of life would ultimately convert all other ways of life. There are many periods in our development when this could have been true. But in one way or another, we seem to have lost a great deal of our spiritual leadership as well as our temporal leadership. One of the reasons, perhaps, for this difficulty is that the recent emergencies which have risen around the world have been equally disastrous to Western man and to Eastern man. The East, looking to the West, has not found that we were able to carry our own problem adequately. And the West, looking to the East, has come to the same conclusion. Most of the great monuments of culture, which were supposed to ensure the securities of peoples, have failed under the stress of present world conditions. It appears more, therefore, that we stand together, East, West, North, and South, in one dilemma. And up to the present moment, there does not appear to be any clear solution to this dilemma. And peoples of various cultures, observing their own and those of their neighbors, can no longer sense that somewhere there is an adequate leadership. The whole concept of cultural leadership has more or less disintegrated. It is therefore quite reasonable that peoples of other beliefs should follow the example which we set. We went out to bring to the whole world our good tidings of great joy. We brought them, and nobody seems to be very joyful about it, including the folks that brought them. Therefore, it is quite possible that we are now going to see something that we never lived to hope or expect to see namely that other people are going to try and save us. Now, this seems to be the last insult of a difficult generation. And in religion, this is particularly embarrassing, because we move from the commonplace to the utterly unique. Each religion feels its own curious and powerful uniqueness. Not long ago, I received some newspapers from Pakistan, where prominent educators and political leaders are gathering their resources to try and help us spiritually. We are assured at the present time that in various parts of the Asiatic hinterland, the most remote and we might say underprivileged regions of the earth, prayers for our salvation are going up to gods we do not even know the names of. Well, let's not reject these prayers. We are definitely in need of something, and maybe that is it. I remember Lowell Thomas bringing us the message of the Dalai Lama of Tibet, in which this young but rather brilliant and remarkable person has assured us that the prayers of Tibet are with us. I think we need them. Some way we need something that we do not currently find available. We are also receiving as much spiritual help as we are willing to take from Hinduism. And more missionaries of these beliefs are coming over into the wilderness of the West to try to sow some seeds of culture. 25 years ago, this would have been a rather humorous situation. We would have taken it very tolerantly, perhaps, because that, for the most part, is our way. But we would have regarded these missionaries, leaving behind all that was solid, stable, secure, peaceful, to come into the desolate wilderness of Western civilization. We would have regarded them with amusement or pity. Today we do not know just how to regard them. And more of our people are being influenced by the messages that are coming to us from elsewhere. We also realize that a powerful counterstream continues to flow into areas which we can reach. But at the present time, most of the great missionary fields of 50 years ago are closed to us. These people are no longer being initiated into our concepts or our ways of life. It would then appear that there is a certain impasse that affects not only our industrial relationships, but our cultural and religious foundations. We are informed, for example, were in an article not long ago that if we make an invention today, the Japanese will improve on it and sell it back to us cheaper than we can produce it ourselves. We find foreign labor problems encroaching upon the American concept of work. Incidentally, this concept of work has been growing rather dim in the West. Work is at the present time a kind of an unhappy chore that we do not engage in unless it is absolutely necessary. So little by little, viewpoints change. And in the midst of this changing, shifting pattern of culture, we are somewhat amazed to find learned works appearing, careful research projects being set up by other people in other parts of the world to try to find out what is wrong with us. This diagnosis is not always entirely satisfying to our thinking, but the detached observer often comes to some very valuable conclusions. Among the most brilliant Eastern scholars today is Dr. Suzuki. He is a man who exemplifies an East-West understanding quite different from the sentimentalism of the Western enthusiast or the continuing pressure of the Western missionary. Dr. Suzuki is an elderly man. He has had a very long life. He has become an expert in one of the most difficult sciences or arts of Eastern religion, and that is Zen. He has furthermore been a careful and thoughtful observer of the Western life way, and has for a number of years been lecturing at Columbia University. He is a member of the Japanese Academy, and brings to his viewpoints a scholarship that is equal to anything that we can produce here in the West. Perhaps one of the most fascinating thoughts in connection with Dr. Suzuki is that here we have a man of deep educational insight who has attained distinction in world leadership, who is most articulate in the English language, and who is a man generally respected for his erudition throughout the world. Yet this man has dared to make a specialty in a field still largely neglected in the West, and that is religious philosophy. He dares to be an idealist. He dares to think in terms of man's spiritual need. And yet he does this, or does these things in a way that forces our attention. In a great many respects, Dr. Suzuki reminds me of Carl Jung in his approach to life, in his thought. And in fact, Dr. Jung has at least one occasion written an introduction to one of Dr. Suzuki's books. So we are not concerned too much with the abilities of Dr. Suzuki. These are established. But we are interested when he does a book comparing Buddhist and Christian mysticism. He comes to Christianity, obviously, as a non-Christian. 50 years ago, this would have meant there would have been no sale for his book in the United States. Now it is selling very nicely, thank you, because it is reaching into the lives of these people who, as Dr. Suzuki himself points out, are troubled in the core of their own lives. They are troubled by situations for which they have no reasonable solution. He does not, however, go on to make an odious comparison between Eastern and Western ways. He is too good a scholar for this. He points out certain things which he believes to be true, but he does not, in any sense of the word, attempt to proselyte on Western man. He would, however, like to suggest that there is something that Western man should be thinking about. And he also is not beyond noting that there are things that Eastern man should be thinking about. Perhaps Dr. Suzuki is attempting to establish the foundations of a world philosophy of life. He senses the great need for it, and he is quite certain that it cannot be accomplished except through a union of that which is known. Dr. Suzuki is not, however, interested in a merely sentimental tolerance between peoples. He realizes that it is far too late for this. He also realizes that tolerance is one of the most evident signs of intolerance. Where we tolerate things, it simply means that we attempt to convey the idea that we are broad-minded, when in fact we are not at all. Tolerance means that we are right, but we're willing to let the other fellow live if he insists on doing it. This is not the basis of any real understanding. What we have to have in the future is a rekindling, a relighting of the great fires of human purpose. fires that have burned very low, and under the pressure of existing situations threaten to be entirely extinguished. In his effort to find a solution to this, it is perfectly natural and proper that Dr. Suzuki should take refuge in his own commitment, which is Zen. However, as he points out, Zen is only a word meaning a process. Zen is not a creed. It is not a cult. Zen is an attitude. Therefore, Zen can be involved in the attitudes of any people without taking them from their own root cultures. Zen is a way of looking at everything. And the learned doctor suspects that every man, everywhere, should begin to look, to seek with a new inner sense of sight for the foundations of his enduring philosophy. Dr. Suzuki expresses, therefore, considerable amazement, and this is a rather naive point of view, but profundity and naivete go together in Eastern thinking. The great wise people of the East have all been very childlike, and the same has largely been true of the most enlightened people of the West. Great depth of learning brings a gentle simplicity to living, and comes gradually to simply ignore the confusions and complexities that might disturb the inner tranquility of life. So with rather a childish point of view in this respect, Dr. Suzuki made a discovery. He discovered that there were some mystics in the West who seemed to be pretty good exponents of Mahayana Buddhism. He is acknowledgedly surprised. It never has occurred to him, or did not, up to the time when he began to give this matter serious consideration, that the very roots of the solution to our problem are also in our own culture as well as in his, and that on a common ground we could achieve a great deal. In other words, if the East was true to its philosophy and the West was true to its philosophy, we would both be believing the same thing already. And this is a point which comes as a distinct shock to us, because we have never assumed that such a union was possible without conversion. In other words, either we had to be converted or they had to be converted. That both have already the roots of the solution in their own ways of life would perhaps astonish a good many pro-Western peoples. So in his studies of Western mysticism, Dr. Suzuki came upon a personality which we discussed here not long ago, and that was the great German mystic Meister Eckhart. He discovered in Eckhart a really kindred spirit. He realized that under the pressure of Western theology, this spirit could not unfold as rapidly or as easily or as smoothly as among Eastern mystics. But in Eckhart was a person who possessed insight. Eckhart was not only a mystic in the more sentimental meaning of the term, he was a mystic in the Zen sense. He was a mystic with a tremendous dynamic and with a very sharp sword of spiritual reality. And Dr. Suzuki quotes quite freely from the writings of Meister Eckhart in his establishment of an East-West concept of mysticism. Dr. Suzuki, pointing out the foundations of religion, brings several points into focus. First of all, if we think, as he says, of Eastern religion, whether we agree with it or not, whether we accept it or not. We are inclined to think of something serenely aloof, quietly detached. We do not think of Eastern religion in terms of great aggressive movements. We do not think of Eastern religion in terms of a militant revivalism. We cannot imagine in the East a phenomenon like that of Billy Graham. The Eastern mind just doesn't work that way. In the East, there are no sawdust trails, and there are very few indications of frightening a man into a state of grace. This is not an Eastern phenomenon. In the East, the tendency is to consider religion as quietude, religion as a very warm, peaceful search for value. Most of the images of Mahayana Buddhism, particularly in Japan, which is Dr. Suzuki's homeland, are either of a mild and pleasing nature, or else, if they have been inherited from some earlier East Indian source and still reserve or keep some of their gruffness or their apparent violence of appearance, the people themselves have long since interpreted all this violence out of them and regard the so-called grim and menacing images merely as the defenders of principles, or as man's own shadow, man's own darkness, leading him astray. Therefore, to the East, these images of a more gruesome appearance, at least, simply suggest man as the departer from truth, and truth in turn slowly but grimly but inevitably bringing man back again to the consideration of the great values of existence. So we are most inclined to think of Zen as old Daruma huddled in his cloak, meditating toward a blank wall, and also to assume with this posture that there is in Eastern religion something strangely negative. And this, of course, is our last refuge against being converted to something else. We have come to the conclusion that Eastern man simply is less active, less determined, less resourceful, less certain of his course and way, and is lacking in those admirable ambitions upon which we build career. Of course, we are beginning to doubt this apathy in our Japanese neighbors, who seem to be rolling up their sleeves and doing a remarkable job of a number of things under many limitations that we do not suffer from. We are therefore mildly astonished at the economic restoration of Japan in the years following World War II. We open our eyes with a measure of surprise when we learn that the city of Tokyo has outrun New York and London and is now the largest city in the world, and also one of the best built and equipped cities. These things make us begin to wonder whether we can depend upon Oriental apathy, whether we can assume that these Eastern nations are going to doze their way through the ages while we continue to dominate the world. There seems to be some doubt about this, and the doubt is taking very positive shape. How then are we to look at this Eastern way, as perhaps Dr. Suzuki might invite us to look at it? Certainly we see the quiet meditating figures of the Buddha, with his gaze upon some eternity beyond our comprehension. We have already come to know the gracious figure of Kannan, deity of compassion. We have come to like very much kindly Jizo standing on the roads that guard the courses of men. We are beginning to sense the simplicity and dignity of Shibui. we begin to think more and more of Japanese architecture, the simplicity of the Japanese home, the wonderful use of natural materials, and the perfect willingness of the Japanese intellectual to allow his home to sink into its environment, rather than to make it stand out like a bandaged thumb on the landscape. These changes begin to mean quite a lot to us. And we are affected by them perhaps mostly in the terms of a certain tranquility, a certain gentleness, a certain kindliness that these surroundings seem to stimulate within our own thought and emotion. On this ground, then, Dr. Suzuki points out that the Mahayana tradition especially, and in this book the doctor goes beyond Zen to study at least in part the whole structure of Northern Buddhism, or what we might term here in the West the idea of Protestant Buddhistic thinking. He comes to the conclusion that this archetype, this vision, this picture of quietude, of integration, of a person not aggressive, but always giving the peculiar sense of being immovable. The individual who cannot be swept away by storm or stress, but has no storm or stress in himself. The individual who wins by a certain inevitability, which has come to dominate his thoughts and his emotions. To Dr. Suzuki, this suggests perhaps something of the Buddhistic archetype, the Buddhistic thought, the pattern underlying the entire concept. And by contrast, he points out that our Western religions, from the very beginning, have been religions of stress. From the earliest period of our religious history in the West, religion has been fighting for survival against something. It fought against the Egyptians. It fought against the Assyrians. It fought against the Romans. And its entire early history is a history of struggle, of wandering in wilderness, of strife, and of a continual record of disobedience continually punished. A scholar has noted that this to a great degree is the story of the Old Testament, which is little more than an account of the wanderings of a people striving desperately to preserve their faith against tremendous external forces, and then later to protect their faith against the weaknesses and corruptions in their own natures. These points to Dr. Suzuki are somewhat distasteful. He is just not a man of that kind. Now, we may say that he's wrong, but the point that we are interested in making at the moment is, this is his viewpoint. With the rise of Christendom, the struggle went on. The earliest profane histories of Christianity deal with the martyrdom of Christians in the Circus Maximus, the struggle of the early faith to survive the mysteries and tragedies of an early pagan environment, and then gradually the struggle of the church to survive itself, to divide the heretics from its own ranks, and to continuously persecute these heretics. The church in turn being again and again persecuted itself, so that down through the ages comes a vision of Western religion, a religion of continual defensiveness, a defensiveness that has written into the subjective structure of our faith the militant orthodoxy which we know. This orthodoxy is not something that the individual seems to feel that he needs. This orthodoxy is an armament against a continual enemy, against the pressure of everything contrary to his faith. And gradually it has become an armament against the pressure of the very denominations of his own religion. Out of all this, then, has come the concept that when you look at the structure of Western religion, as perhaps Dr. Suzuki, as a non-Westerner, sitting rather quietly in his own bamboo grove, would look at it, he sees in the West not the quietude and composure of a deep, warm, continuing conviction of value. He sees in the West a continual striving, a symbol of Christianity associated from the beginning with suffering, with martyrdom, and with death, and the assumption that only through suffering, martyrdom, and death the final spiritual triumph can be achieved. I don't like to speak for Dr. Suzuki, but I would assume from his book that Dr. Suzuki is not convinced that this psychology of religion, based upon man achieving virtue by way of suffering alone, or dominantly suffering, by way of continuing self-denial, through the abnegation of his own normal humanity, and his tremendous dedication in terms of pain to a conviction. I do not think he feels that this is an adequate religious point of view. I think he feels that it is essentially the kind of a religious point of view that might cause a people to be equally aggressive in everything else, and building upon a philosophy or religion of continual strife, of continual struggle against the pressures of circumstance, that this in turn would lead to a very aggressive egoism, that it would lead also to industrial strife, political strife, artistic, musical, and cultural strife, that it would undermine the entire tranquility of our way of life, and might very well end Western man's history with a story of a universal and almost complete frustration. This frustration resulting from the inevitable tragedy of inevitable force striking immovable object. This situation, he feels, has a deep bearing not only upon our religion, but upon our total way of life. It is responsible, perhaps, for this attitude that our faith must be the best, our merchandise must be the best, our homes must be the most elaborate, and the constant status struggle for wealth and popularity, fame, advancement, because we have built our whole way of life upon these aggressive patterns of rolling up our sleeves and fighting our way through obstacles. Now, if we go back to Zen for an understanding of a fighting through of obstacles, what do we actually find? According to the rather simple and perhaps inscrutable way of the East, a man fighting his way through an obstacle is simply an individual fighting his way through himself. In other words, the obstacle is not society. The obstacle is not the world. The obstacle is not even the unknown. The obstacle is the fact that the subject of Western man must have an object. There must be some reason for an individual to continually fight against something, to attain an almost universal neurosis on the subject of defense and offense. To be able to be a successful soldier, there must be an occasional war. And where a large military force is held in readiness or kept in training, and there is no war, there is a serious difficulty likely to arise. The large, ready army is almost certain to find a war, and a powerful, adamant, ambitious, aggressive person must have an object against which to turn his resources and his energies. So in Zen, the world obstacle arises out of the world ambition itself. There isn't any obstacle. We create the obstacle. And by various indoctrinations over a long period of time, we have left the world in a condition where it does not know better than to allow itself to create obstacle. And this is just exactly as true of the communistic writings of Karl Marx as almost any other type of subject that we can contact. Always there must be an enemy. Always there must be the reason for a holy war. There must be a crusade against something. And anyone who does not believe that the present communistic movement is a holy war simply doesn't understand Karl Marx. Because actually Marx has taken the religious emotions of man and simply moved them into a social pattern and given the individual a new crusade. But it is the same crusading instinct that it always was. The ancient saints may no longer be upon the icons in Russia, but the new faces, far from sanctified, have become the new saints. And this is true wherever we have a great conflict moving through the consciousness of man. So the doctor suggests we pause for a moment and take a little stock of the substance of this conflict. In the first place, if we were devout Christians, if we really lived our religion, we wouldn't have this conflict. And most non-Christian people surveying the situation have come to the same conclusion. If we really believed that our universe was created by a good God, that throughout its entire existence it is in the keeping of a heavenly Father, and that this deity is capable at any time of any necessary intercession, and that this world is therefore eternally forever the production of a deity capable of controlling and directing it, we wouldn't all be out trying to take on God's work for him. If we believed that right would triumph, we would be satisfied to do right, but we are not. If we believed that through prayer, through meditation, through inner life, through the simple acceptance of the Christian ministry, we would find out our own spiritual salvation, we would be doing these things. But such is not the case. And out of the very core of Western Christianity has risen one of the most positive and dramatic agnosticisms and even atheisms in the world today. We're just not practicing what we preach. And the only answer can be that we do not believe it. We accept it, but we do not believe. To make this situation a little clearer then, the East has this reputation for a strange spiritual detachment. The West has a reputation in all corners of the world for a very strange material attachment. So we have two highly conflicting cultures, and each one points to the other as an example of that which must inevitably fail. Perhaps our own way of life is a little more dramatic, inasmuch as, for the last century at least, we have rather dominated world affairs. We have played a tremendous part in the shaping of the destiny of non-Christian peoples. We have for a long time controlled the roads of traffic and commerce between the East and West. Ships sailed the sea to all the ports of the distant world. Yet this 100 years of undisputed leadership by the West has not accomplished a true civilization for either the East or the West. And at this moment, the undisputed leadership seems to be threatening the very survival of the whole world. For it is out of our Western ingenuity that the most dangerous instruments of destruction we have ever known have been formulated. So if Dr. Suzuki is not applauding Western ways too loudly, he has ground for his reservations, as most thoughtful persons in the West realize at this time. This idea that we have, that only by a continual active flow of libido can we get anywhere, is beginning to sum up in the simple fact that this constant flow of libido is getting us somewhere, but not where we want to go. It is bringing us closer and closer to the brink of chaos. If then we recognize that many centuries of basically wrong orientation have produced nothing to justify themselves, that we have not attained any of the ends which we originally sought, and that we have gradually come to accept compromises, the most important compromise being the substitution of wealth for happiness. If these compromises in themselves are going stale, and if today we are producing a generation of peoples comparatively hopeless, without any principles, without any foundations to guide them, without any securities on which to build, it has now reached the point where our insecurity is beginning to threaten the security of other peoples, and where, just as surely as we view with alarm the spread of communism throughout the world, other non-communistic peoples, with a devout desire to have some form of security, are beginning to be alarmed at us, for they feel that our psychology of wealth at the expense of principle is as dangerous to ultimate survival as communism is. Either one of these solutions is less than a Chinaman's choice. Whichever way it goes, there is nothing ahead but trouble. Dr. Suzuki then brings out his own little story, that there is a level of thinking in all parts of the world, but perhaps this level is more available in two faiths, Buddhism and Christianity, than among the other more austere and more segregated beliefs. Buddhism, Muslimism, and Christianity are the three great international, interracial religions. They have broken through the various boundaries of race and caste to become powerful forces in the world as world beliefs. Therefore, the bringing together of these into some kind of an harmonious pattern could well be a determinant in the future of our world and our culture. Zen, to Dr. Suzuki, simply represents the gradual development of personal integration. An integration that does not lean upon externals, and an integration that is gradually cleansed of the tremendous ulterior forces which have a tendency to destroy the validity of works. You will remember that at the very beginning of Christianity, the Christian mystic was a more or less dedicated person. He was vowed to poverty. He was vowed to an unselfish life of dedication. He was not supposed to own things. He was never under any condition to use his faith as a means of improving his own estate. He was to recognize the importance of the words of Jesus, that the one who would be the greatest among us, let him be the servant of all. Christianity, in its deepest, most mystical sense, was a religion of service. It was a religion of sharing and of giving. It was a religion of modesty and of conscience. And it would protect its followers against many of the great vices of the Roman Empire and later of the medieval extravagance of Europe by requiring of these followers a very simple, monastic, detached way of life. Somewhere along the line, this simplicity was lost. Somewhere along the line, Christianity moved from a foundation of good works to an increasingly ambitious position in world affairs. Little by little, the glories of the church began to exceed the virtues of the church. And after a while, deeply involved in world politics, the church became itself a political instrument. It became a great accumulator of wealth. It began to take a greater and greater part in mundane affairs. It produced at one time a great many cardinals and great leaders who were never even priests or monks, but were simply political persons raised to the cardinal's red while still in their teens. This type of situation could not but undermine the simple purpose of religion, and to place the individual in a highly combative, highly aggressive relationship in which it became more and more necessary for him to be astute in statesmanship and less necessary that he be a virtuous human being. This has been the story all the way along. It might have been the story among Buddhist peoples also, had it not been that, generally speaking, they did not have the physical opportunities for such a rapid motion toward materialism. There is plenty of materialism in Asia today, but this is not going to solve Asia's problem any more than it has solved the problems of the Occident. And Dr. Suzuki is convinced that a few mystics like Buddha, Meister Eckhart, and the founders of the various Zen sects of Japan were very clear in giving us certain advice, certain suggestions, certain ways of thinking, which could be of the greatest value to us. Now, there is another point that we have to take into consideration at this stage in our thinking. If man was a permanent guest here, if he was going to remain on this earth with his present equipment and his present faculties and his present interests for 1,000 years even, or more generally 10,000 years, there might be some reason for the long-range strategy that he tries to build in a short-ranged life. If it was possible for a man to build a vast enterprise and to become master of wealth and authority in this world, and could then continue the advancement of his project indefinitely, there might be some more obvious reason for his tremendous aggressiveness. But what is his aggressiveness? It is really little more than a tempest in a teapot. That which he so aggressively accumulates, his descendants will, with equal aggressiveness, waste and spend. The empires which men build may not even survive them, and if so, soon become decadent. In the very hour in which the individual, struggling aggressively for his own achievement, is in the process of achieving, and a host of bacteria are undermining him, there is no permanence here. The path of ambition ended for Adolf Hitler in a bunker in Berlin, and it ended for Mussolini along a road in northern Italy. Regardless of the ambition, it is not capable of fulfillment. Consequently, this vast aggressiveness, this tremendous grasping for power, is a grasping after a shadow that disappears even as you take hold of it. So actually, the case in favor of aggressiveness is a poor one. We may say, however, of course, that our aggressiveness will build foundations for others who come after us. We inherited the aggressiveness of the past. How grateful are we? Is the past as a burden upon us something that we are thankful we have inherited, or is it a nuisance from the beginning? Is what we are handing over to the next generation today as the result of our own ceaseless struggle? Are we handing the future anything but a disaster? What is this tremendous aggressiveness producing? What foundation have we for it? Perhaps psychologically it would be well to admit right now that most of this tremendous aggression is nothing but psychic acidosis. The individual is uncomfortable. He is miserable. He is sick. He is frustrated in the simplest things of life. Therefore, he turns to aggression largely as an escape from reality. If this same man, who is now building a tremendous career, which will end with his own death, and his own death will come the sooner as his career becomes more intensive, this individual, would he be what he is? Would he be striving for what he is striving? If he possessed within himself certain convictions, certain values, and was able to live a truly contented, integrated life. If this man had a good family that understood him and he understood them, a close, deep family relation, if he had a good group of simple friends, if he had a few creative interests in art, music, or literature, if he had a reasonable degree of self-control in habits and in temperances, if he had a simple working philosophy of life that gave him the joy of simple achievement in the warm atmosphere of affection and regard, would he be interested in this dramatic achievement? Western people shake their heads, say, oh, it would be tragic. Think of a man so happy that he couldn't build a career. Think of an individual who would be drowned in the dismal negation of Asia, when in reality he could have gone out and killed himself in 6 easy stages. But the truth remains that this man going out and killing himself for the fulfillment of his own ambition is perpetuating a cycle of situations. And when enough people do this, Western civilization becomes a chaos in which there is no security for anyone. And the individual is no longer struggling to succeed. He is struggling to prevent himself from drowning. But wherever it is, the struggle goes on. Somewhere in our way of life, there has to be a new sense of value. In the book of Revelation, it is written that there shall be a new heaven and a new earth, and the old heaven and the old earth shall be no more. We're getting to the point where we're very much in need of this new heaven and this new earth. We are in need of a new kind of understanding of spiritual value, heaven, and a new kind of organization of material problems, earth. There has to be not a continual patching, a continual effort to rescue something from the dismal condition which it has earned for itself. There has to be somewhere a clear-cut understanding which will give us an entirely new orientation toward living. Of course, Dr. Suzuki suggests modestly Zen. And if we accept by Zen not just an Oriental doctrine, but a thinking about things, we will discover, as he did, that we have had Zen in the West. We not only had it in the case of Meister Eckhart, we came very close to having it in certain of the works of Nietzsche. We have come very close to having it in a great many things that have affected our way of life. It is very obvious in certain aspects of the Platonic dialogues. It comes back to us in the great Christian mystics like St. Francis de Assisi. It is evident everywhere that beneath the surface of our way of life there has been this stream of mystical apperception. And it is this mystical apperception which is just another term for Zen. For Zen is simply an attitude toward things. And either we have to get an attitude that is worthwhile and live it, or we will undoubtedly drift further and further into a condition which is today almost unbearable. So Zen, with its composure, with its quietude, frightens the West. But if we are terrified at being quiet, the East is terrified at the noise that we are making. It is terribly concerned that our ways are going to more and more penetrate into Eastern society in the wrong way. This penetration is already on. It has been keenly felt in Japan. And at the present time, thoughtful persons no longer go to Tokyo, which is a great modern metropolis. They retire quietly to Nara or Nikko or Kyoto, where the old ways continue. Tokyo today is becoming more and more like a great Western city, and that means that it is becoming a more confusing, difficult, and unrewarding place every day. It is now a great center of business. It is not a center of culture. The Orient doesn't like to see this happening either. It does not like to see its young people take on the worst of us. It is not happy to have our motion pictures, our theater, our literature, transforming its younger generation into a problem generation, largely concerned with competitions in bubblegum. This is not what they are looking for. Something has gone very sour in cultural interchange. We constantly talk about bringing culture, but what we bring is not culture. So there must be an international understanding on this matter somewhere along the line. An understanding which will help all good people to preserve what is good in their own way of life and not continually undermine each other in the name of progress, in the name of dynamics, and in the service of uncontrolled ambition. Uncontrolled ambition destroyed Japan 20 years ago. Undestroyed ambition will continue to destroy the nations and peoples of the world. And it comes right straight down into our own personal lives, into our homes, into our families. For we are still, as individuals, heavily indoctrinated by the Western concept that life is a great struggle for individuality. That the individual must be himself, and no one has paused to find out whether this self was worth being or not. So the individual becomes himself and at the same time an international nuisance. There is no discrimination as to what is worthwhile about self, what is valuable, what is necessary, what is purposeful. So in the desperate effort to be free, we are only achieving intellectual, moral, and physical license. Then we resent the laws which are forced upon us. Until today there are so many laws we cannot even remember them. But each of these laws arises out of some error of human conduct. Something that we do that is dangerous to others. And laws must be passed to protect us from ourselves and each other. So Zen comes in with this very definite thinking taken from world mysticism. The individual has at the source and root of himself the only answer that he will ever know to his own problem. Man is not born a derelict. He is not shipwrecked before he comes into birth. nor is he born into a world whose misfortunes inevitably destroy his own rights of achievement. The individual is born into a world which he has the right to use, and according to our way of thinking, the right to abuse. And the most important thing in the life of every individual. Also, man has been given faculties and powers and energies with which to advance the proper destiny of himself, and in so doing to achieve the proper destiny for all men. The person is equipped to be a person. Yet in this struggle as we know it, these values are continuously lost in something that is not real and something that is not valuable. Today it would seem that the only solution to our problem is the final crash of a collapsing civilization. It seems as though we must come finally to this Götterdämmerung, this twilight of the gods, which in the old Nordic rites brought Valhalla, Asgard, and the three worlds down into a flaming oblivion, above which finally rose the tides of the eternal sea. It looks as though perhaps the only answer is that man must crash completely. That the world that he has built without any real thoughtfulness or without any real attentiveness to the consequences of his own actions must ultimately bring him down in common ruin before he will accept the simple fact. Of all stubbornness, this is the most aggressive and dangerous kind. It is perhaps only in this way that the new heaven and the new earth can come about. No one seems to have the courage or the strength to break away from the existing pattern. Yet this break is not the terrible stress that we think it is. It takes much more ill-guided courage to continue to make the mistakes than it would to stop. Yet we do not seem to have even enough self-control left to stop the process of hurting ourselves. And this applies to the individual. A large part of our daily conduct is simply making us miserable. But we haven't the courage to stop doing what hurts us. Perhaps we haven't the available insight to realize what is wrong. We have so externalized our lives that when things go wrong, we blame everyone, but never ourselves. We seem to feel that our destiny is linked totally to a political situation or to an economic situation, and that nothing that we can do will make any difference. This is all defeatism, and it is also profound ignorance. How any people with the largest group of well-educated citizens in the world can be so woefully deficient in the first principles of knowledge to believe that there's nothing you can do about this, that perhaps is the most astonishing phenomenon of all. Because actually, this great acceptance, the acceptance of the inevitability of stress, which is common to Western peoples, can only be sustained by total blindness. There is no way in which you can justify this position by any kind of basic thinking of any type. We must simply ignore everything we claim to believe in order to arrive at this negative conclusion. Certainly there is something we can do about anything. We do not necessarily mean by this that we can dispense with Mr. Castro overnight, or that the Russians are going to suddenly turn into a benevolent society. We do not mean this. But what we do mean is that we as individuals can come into an harmonic adjustment with our world. We can come to recognize its faults and recognize its virtues. We can learn the lessons that it has to teach. We can live good, constructive, useful lives. We can meet the future with a good hope, simply by beginning to understand ourselves and the principles upon which life is built. These principles are probably as well expounded in Zen as anywhere else today, and it is rather good that they should have a contemporary spokesman. We all respect the Sermon on the Mount, but it was long ago. We respect the life of St. Francis, but we doubt if he could live it today. We respect the philosophy of Meister Eckhart, but not one American in a million has ever heard of him. We regard and revere the heroic lives of great people of our own time, but these do not touch us as they should. So perhaps the fact that there is somewhere in the world a living faith, vitally sustained by solidly convinced people, and that this faith has some of the elements that we need, perhaps this helps to make it a contemporary thing. And we have to realize that whatever it is being lived by contemporary people. And the one point about Zen that has always seemed most interesting to me is that while it is one of the most subtle of all philosophies, and strangely one of the most mystical, that in Japan it has been largely held by the military class. It was the consolation for the soldier. In China, the nearest parallel to Zen, which is Taoism, was also very largely the religion of the businessman. Now here's mysticism dominating the life of the soldier in Japan, and mysticism dominating the life of the merchant, the shopkeeper, the businessman, the aggressive buyer and seller in China. Now, between the military aggressiveness of Japan and the industrial aggressiveness of the Chinese merchant, we have an environment of circumstances not so distant from our own. Here, the tremendous aggressiveness of man and his constant instinct to merchandise, perhaps these could be peculiarly reached by a philosophy that has been most successful everywhere with this group, or these groups. Now, why would Zen become the most important to a soldier? I think most of the boys of our own group who are in foxholes know the answer. Zen is a philosophy of a dynamic adjustment to inevitables. The soldier with a most uncertain future, facing death and pain almost every moment, separated from all the comforts and consolations of his normal life, living in constant hazard, is in the most immediate need of the most dynamic conviction. And it is only by some such conviction that he can sustain himself. The general life of the soldier is today the life of Western man. We live as he did and does, under a constant insecurity. We live as he does, under a pressure of circumstances that appear dictatorial and arbitrary, but against which he cannot rebel. We live almost as he does, whether it is in a foxhole or a fallout shelter. We are faced with his insecurities. Therefore, he needs something that gives him a dynamic adjustment to a total plan, gives him an insight into a good that transcends life and death, and something which he can immediately apply to his inner consciousness with some form of satisfying results. In other words, he has to utterly face this sense of transiency, which is everywhere in our way of life. We don't realize it, but we are in exactly his position. So he is looking for immediate vitality of spiritual centeredness. Now, what happens when an individual moves more or less deeply into his own center? The Zen in meditation, or the meditative concept of this non-aggressive way of life, what happens? If a person finds his own center, finds his own core of life, and becomes aware of it, this individual has a new kind of courage that is not aggressive, but is eternal. The individual who is convinced of value and serves value is beyond temptation. And temptation is our big problem. It follows almost inevitably that the individual who has achieved an internalization is stronger than a person who has only outward supports. The person of wealth is weak when he loses his money. The individual with authority is meaningless if he loses his job. The individual with all forms of physical security is insecure if they are taken from him. All these things, depending upon circumstances, force us to view that circumstances today are unpredictable. Thus, these things do not lead to strength. They lead to fear, to worry, to doubt. And the accumulation of them at a desperate pace is the most complete expression of selfishness that we know. Let us assume, rather, that this individual, fully aware of his responsibilities and by no means intending to depart into some nirvanic sphere, simply faces the simple problem of striving after immediate value. Value in the sense of these things which will protect him. How much less man could earn and how much more he would have if he did not have to spend most of what he makes correcting his own mistakes. How much better off we would be if the national health improved 50 or 75%. How much more money would we have if we did not have to constantly seek medication and psychological help for problems we should never have? These things strike right at the very core of Zen. So let us think for a moment how we could apply this to our own immediate problem. Let us take the Zen attitude of absolute nihilism for a second. Let us admit that this whole existence that we know is nothing but an extension of our own faculties, that it is nothing but our own thoughts and emotions fashioning out of substances around us, merely the likeness of our own intensities, that these goblins, whether they be mystical, psychological, political, or economic, are simply demons created out of our own fear, out of our own ignorance, out of our own selfishness. If we would simply stop at some moment energizing and vitalizing phantoms that have no existence whatever, we might have a little time to examine facts. The facts of life are very simple. Perhaps it is an oversimplification to use Bernard Shaw's remark, man is born, man suffers, and man dies. But this is perhaps the most substantial definition that we have of life. Outside of these facts, man has to create his life. He has to create within the pattern of inevitables. He has to create these things which will be most suitable to his own needs and add the greatest amount to his own serenity of spirit. If he worked with these problems collectively and individually, he probably would have no wars. But he cannot quite energize his own consciousness in these respects. He waits for other people to do it. Well, during the World War II, we had an epidemic of limitations and restrictions on various commodities, including gasoline, and it became a popular slogan, "Is this trip necessary?" There is something Zen in this particular pause that could very well refresh and also eliminate an unnecessary trip. today when we look at life and look at the things that we do, are these things necessary? And what constitutes necessity? Necessity is not justified by a blind impulse within ourselves to do these things. Necessity is not based upon the fact that other people do them. Necessity is only based upon one factor alone, that through the doing of them, something of permanent value is achieved. There is a reason to read a good book if we learn from it. There is a reason to live with great art if it enriches our souls. But there must be a good come out of anything, or it is not necessary. On this basis alone, we'd simplify life 50%. Each person who takes upon himself something of integration gains a quietude that enables him to act from himself instead of from pressure. This is one of the secrets of Zen. In Zen, there is always time to do things graciously, to do things beautifully, and to do things in a kindly way. This pause, this element of the sudden discovery of time, reminds us that our whole concept of time is our own also. That this rushing from here to there is not a concept of real time, but that time is something we have to win back from the pressures of our own personality. But that until man takes time to consider, time to think, time to analyze his words before he speaks them, time for gracious and kindly things, time for understanding and family and friends. Until man rescues this time, what has he? Zen says that he has to have this. For the last 50 years, we have been creating conveniences to free man so that he would have more time. But because of his own internal nature, this time has become a menacing force in his life, and he must waste it as rapidly as he can because he cannot live with it. Zen would move into these things. In many respects, Zen is perhaps the most advanced psychology we know today. For it is the only psychology that we do know that will go to the root of human character and simply say, this has to be done. It is not a matter of adjusting man to his world. It is the problem of adjusting man to himself. And the individual who to himself is true cannot then be false to any man. And it is to find this trueness. It must be found in quietude, in relaxation, and in integration. It must come through the simplification of life. It must come through the individual gradually manifesting from within himself the beauty that is there, rather than allowing his psychic toxins to surround his life with impossible situations. The individual who has achieved this core integration is practically indestructible. Not only that, but his pressures will always be in the direction of the common needs. He can be captured, but he can never be conquered. He can never be anything but what he is, a free person in space. His adjustments are the gracious gesture of one who recognizes what is necessary and does it. But never for a moment is he captured by the delusion of the world in which he lives. This does not mean that he will not be a good father, or a good teacher, or a good businessman, or a good employee. He will be all of these things just as he was before and better. As a parent, he will have the time, the insight to watch and lead his family constructively. As a friend, he will be a true friend without ulterior motive. and as an employee, he will give an honest day's work. These things are fundamental. Without these things, we have no religion. And when we begin to practice the motion of consciousness from within ourselves, realizing a divine life abiding in us, we do not need any other religion. The problem is to get our spiritual insight into action. And before we can, we have to clarify it. And the only way we can clarify it is quietly experience through the illusions of matter and become dynamically aware of this tremendous eternity that is within us. Then thinking in terms of that which is our true self, that which is our inevitable self, that which is the being with which we must live, not now but forever, we can then begin to put our material affairs in order, rendering unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but not rendering unto Caesar the things that are God's. That we will do all things as well as we can and better every day, but we will not create false allegiances either in our personal thinking or in our collective careers. We will weigh everything and cling to that which is good. But to do this, we have to have quietude. We have to be able to sit down and examine value, to understand, to search, to feel, to experience, to know, and to put the wonderful experiences of the inner life above the confusion and crashing of outer existence. So Zen simply tells us that it's time to sit down, be quiet, and find out what the universe wants of man. And that unless we do this, we're going to be in trouble. And it doesn't make any difference whether we're in the East or West. We're still going to be in trouble. And it doesn't make any difference whether we overwhelm communism or communism overwhelms us. Communism is just another name for the eternal adversary that must always arise as long as man's own conduct is inadequate. When we ruin the world, something comes along. It is not the thing that is coming that is the true cause of our problem. The cause of our problem is that we have permitted the world to get into such a condition that these violent situations arise. The answer is to prevent them by having a world that is already in order, having a life that is already in order, so that comes what will, we are still able to face it with understanding, integrity, and insight. And on the basis of this type of thinking, I think Dr. Suzuki has a message for us. And I think in terms of world need, he is desperately hoping that something will happen to bring this message home, because the disaster that might destroy us will also destroy his people. We are bound together now in one great unity. No one unit of this pattern can fail without involving the disaster to the whole. And it is essential that East and West, we begin to think in terms of basic value, putting that which is necessary first, and burying forever those prejudices, conceits, and deceits from which we have so long suffered in that pit which was to be the final abode of the Prince of Perdition. We have to build straight now in our own thinking and in our own living. And straight thinking and living begins with the leisure within ourselves to sit down and think things through, and then to have the courage to apply these inward discoveries to the conduct of our outward affairs. Time is up. Now I have all kinds of little notes here. I'd like to announce that the men's banquet of the men's group will be on Monday, April 2nd. Reservations can be arranged in the lobby. The men's group and friends and any gentleman who would like to attend is most cordially invited. The dinner will be on April 2nd at the Thistle Inn, and they have a very nice little dining room there. I visited it the last time they had a meeting. I'd like to announce this morning also that we have on the table a few copies that have just come from the bookbinder of the series of smaller paper-bound books that we have, the adepts in the Western esoteric tradition. These 5, now bound in 1 volume, are available for a limited length of time in case you're interested. In connection with this morning, and for general helpfulness, we recommend our commentary on the Quiet Way, a little booklet which we think will help you. May I also mention that on March 25th, a week from today, there will be a guest speaker here, Dr. Robert Gerard, and he will also speak on April 1st. Then on April 8th, Dr. Loomis will speak. Dr. Gerard, as you probably know, has been very much interested in our approach to psychology from a philosophical and religious standpoint, and the lectures which he will give here are based upon the papers which he presented at the International Congress of Psychotherapy in Vienna and the International Meeting on Psychosynthesis in Switzerland in the summer of '61. I think you will find his talks very rewarding. Dr. Loomis is the founder of the Friendly Hills Fellowship in Hemet, California, a non-profit foundation for the attainment of a higher level of health through the coordination of medicine, psychology, religion, and the arts. These should be very interesting meetings, and while we're out trying to convert Texas, this will be an excellent opportunity for you to come here and learn some, we believe and are reasonably certain, some very interesting things. Our own next lecture here will, I believe, be on the Sunday morning, let me see, about the 15th, I guess, the 15th of April, and I believe that our subject on that occasion will be the year of the tiger. Now, I don't know whether you have noticed on signboards lately that there are all kinds of happy and less happy-looking tigers appearing. Why this should be out here in the West, I don't know, but of course, in the Orient, this is the year of the tiger. This is the year of the animal sign of the tiger in their zodiac. And every 12th year is the year of the tiger. And these 12-year patterns are distributed among 5 elements: earth, fire, air, water, and wood. And the complete pattern makes 60 years, or a full cycle. For instance, there is the year of the air tiger. There is the year of the fire tiger. There is the year of the wood tiger, and so on. And these are alternated around a set of 5 cycles of 12, making the 60-year bundle, or tying up of the year. So on this subject, we're going to discuss material dealing with the Eastern thinking about cycles, time cycles, which dominate the research of these people in astronomy and related fields. Now, due to the fact that the committee has other labors on today, the library will not be open, but it will be open next week, and there will be, again, interesting things for your consideration. We hope you'll all be here next week, and we also hope that you will all be here on the date of the beginning of our new series, and will share with us this interesting problem of the year of the tiger and what it means in our way of life. You remember in the patterns or scenes of the nirvana of Buddha, there are always a group of animals around him. There is a belief in the Orient that these animals represent the signs of the zodiac that have also come to do homage to him on the occasion of the great decease. So that these animal symbols are very interesting, and we feel that we have an interesting and unusual subject for you. So don't forget to make your reservations if you will come to the gentleman's dinner. And also, don't forget to come and visit these fine people who are going to speak while I'm away. And we'll see you again when we get back. Thank you very much.